Hickey.
Here.
Mr. Strackoff.
Here.
Mr. Travellini.
Here.
Mr. Odelius.
Here.
Mr. Leonard.
Here.
Mr. Giacobini.
Present.
Mr. Zupnik.
Present.
Ms. Orbana.
Present.
Mr. Walter.
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here.
We're all here.
We're all here. Congratulations.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Janine and Colin, for helping make this work.
Frank, are you here twice, Frank?
I'm partly here because on my computer screen, if you see me looking up instead of looking at you there, when I look up here, it's because that's my computer. If I'm going to share the screen, I need to load it from this other screen. So yes, I'm here on two screens. I don't get any better looking in either of them. In fact, I don't even get any better looking when I do that. So
Hey, Janine, public offering statement.
Open public meeting statement. Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News and to the Courier News and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 16th, 2020.
We do have a flag. I don't know if we can see it, but we can just,
Yes, they can see it.
they can see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag
to the
To the
flag
flag.
United
States of
States
America,
United States of
to the
America.
republic for which
and
it
to the
stands,
republic
Republic,
for which
one
it
nation,
stands,
under God,
one nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
liberty and
with
justice for
justice
liberty
for all.
and justice for all.
that was terrible.
Are we getting worse?
That is
Yes.
just not improving with
Yes.
age.
Just so that I don't have to look. Yeah.
All right, we have some minutes that we need to approve from September 3rd. If you've had a chance to look at it, we need a motion.
So moved. Jeff.
Second.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Amendments approved. Okay, Paul, do you want to go over this schedule first before we get into anything else?
We can talk about that briefly if you like. We've got a number of applications that are either pending before the board or going to move forward. Tonight, really, we just have a completeness review relative to the application for the Shell station on the corner of Lamington Road and 206. Next week, we have 2 or 3 public hearings scheduled. The first, the hearings are for the Brown variance application for a single family home. There's the variance and site plan application for 1525 Bedminster, which is the Shell station on the corner of 206 and Lamington Road. And the third one, it's on the agenda simply because they noticed, is the the Bedminster Farms subdivision. That realistically will not be heard with the other 2 applications we have next week, as well as the fact that the plans were submitted fairly late and they have not yet been reviewed. So they're really going to be on the agenda just for the sake of carrying them into November. Then we'll also be picking up with the Lamington Farm application. We'll have to see how far we get next week with the 1525 206 application. And we have an application that I hope to have a completeness review for you next week on the Pluckerman Inn. We've got applications I know that are coming in for, for the Cidery as well, for an amendment to their site plan. So we've got a busy agenda coming up.
Paul, did you say we were going to do next week, the 8th, or go into November?
I'm sorry, Carol, I didn't make that out.
You didn't, okay.
I didn't hear what you said.
Audio issues now.
I didn't hear what you said, Carol.
We're not scheduling Pluckerman yet.
No, we're not scheduling Pluckerman in. It'll be for a completeness determination next week.
Okay, all right. I didn't quite hear you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we have our schedule for the 8th, and then we'll move Bedminster Farms into November.
The shell is 1525, 20007.
Yes, yes. So it'll be Brown and 1525 Bedminster, which is the Shell station, for next week,
Okay.
okay?
And neither the mayor or I are
Well,
eligible to hear that, or?
I think for Brown, that's the 151 Hackle Barney. Colin and I are eligible, but we're
Yes.
not eligible for the other one.
For the Shell, right.
Right,
So,
Okay,
That's correct.
okay.
so Brown you are, and we'll hear that first. And then we'll do Shell. Okay, do we have some public on, Janine? I think we do.
We definitely do.
Okay.
If anyone would like to say anything, I need you to raise your hand or.
I just wanted to say hello. It's Jeff Lehrer.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Hello there. I just wanted to see if we were deemed complete, so I will see you next week.
I don't think the board has formally take action on that yet, but they will
Okay.
as we work down our agenda to the completeness determination.
Hey, Jeff, when's Elite gonna start?
Start that application.
No. He asked about Elite.
Elite has done their demolition. I think they're,
Oh yeah, they're ready. The developers agreement's being signed on Monday night. The council, well, we hope it'll be approved by the council on Monday night, and they're ready. They're really ready to go. All their easements are done, so they really want to move.
Saw some initial activity down there, but I haven't seen much lately.
else, Jeff?
What's that?
I said, is there anything else, Jeff, that you need?
No, that's all. I'm gonna go on mute again.
Okay, all right, thank you. Is there anyone else, Janine? Did I see somebody else on?
We do have other people, but I believe they're here to just.
Oh, okay.
See anyone raising their hand or.
No, okay. Then I will close the public session for now. And I guess we can go to Frank and start our master plan review.
Madam Chair, do you want to do the completeness determination on 1525 first?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that had been taken care of. All right, let's do that.
I wrote a letter dated September 16th, identifying the additional documentation that's been submitted. As a result of that, there's a couple of minor waivers that are required for completeness, and it's my recommendation that the application be deemed complete and, as I said before, scheduled for a public hearing next week.
So if the board would entertain it, that's a motion to waive the remaining items for completeness as recommended by the township engineer and deem the application complete.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Janine, I guess we need a roll call.
1525.
Right.
Mr. Strackhoff,
Aye.
Cavallini,
Aye.
Cornelius,
Aye.
Leonard,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Aye.
Caravana,
Aye.
Mr. Coulter,
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye. Motion is passed. Okay, well, let's on for next week. Okay, so now we'll go on with Frank to our master plan review. Where did Frank go? Oh, there you are. You need to unmute.
You're muted, Frank.
How's that?
Yeah.
That's better.
Okay, great. Two things that we're going to talk about tonight. One is the land use plan and housing plan amendment that we reviewed last month, which has been updated, and you have I believe you have an updated copy of that with a September 30th update that came out yesterday. And we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. We talked about it before, but it is essentially creating the ORV mixed use village office research mixed use district on the KRE property, and it describes the rationale for that change. And then with regard to the housing element and fair share plan, I think you all recall that our certification was based on our ability to develop 28 affordable rental units as our obligation between now and 2025. We got 5 of those units previously at the Elite project, and this redevelopment or this development area would be proposed to provide some complement of the balance there, probably all of the balance, and maybe more than that. And when I say more than that, it's only because when we look to 2025, Bedminster has, last time I looked, it was 650 or so extra credits beyond what they owe. So the only reason we're doing these affordable rentals is because there is a requirement in the COA rules that these be provided at a certain level based on our obligation. When we look to 2025, we got to assume that the 650 extra credits are still going to keep counting, because they do, they will, they have to. And so we're not going to need more units per se, but we may need to count the beans again a little differently. So if we ended up on the KRE site with something more than the missing 23 units that we need now, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But I'm not trying to suggest the number that we should be striving for, just that this will be an inclusionary development toward meeting that obligation. The description in the housing element amendment that's provided here identifies the fact that according to the COA site suitability criteria, the site's approvable, available, developable, and suitable, as those terms are used by COA. And the master plan amendment does include a map that shows at the last page showing the ORV MU district, which is part of what was ORV right before this change, and part of what remained OR when we put the ORV district in place. So that's the first element, and attached to that is a draft zoning amendment that would be what is recommended as by virtue of this master plan amendment. So these two documents together, the only thing that's missing from the ability of the governing body to put this into law is when it will come back to the planning board for our consistency review, and we'll have to review that compared to the master plan. But we're amending the master plan here, and so consistency should not be an issue, I don't believe. In any event, that part of tonight's agenda doesn't require a lot more discussion, except if the board members have any questions, or if anybody wonders about what all this means, I'm happy to spend time on that.
Yes.
Read through the document this afternoon, and I had a bunch of little detailed
Okay.
observations. Should we mark it up and send it to you? Is that what we should do?
That's probably a prudent way to get the changes made efficiently. I'd be happy to take those suggestions that you have and incorporate a track change version everybody can look at. I don't think that there's urgency about adopting this, but I don't think we want to drag our feet on it either. So I think your suggestion is great, Nick. It's probably the quickest way to get the changes in here and everybody to see a revised version of the document with any other changes.
Okay, fine. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Hey, Frank, quick question. Tim Walter here. Of the
Yes,
28 required units, are they for like individuals? How does it work? Does it have to be a family apartment?
They're family rental units.
Family rental. Okay, so it's got to be what, more than 1 bedroom, I assume? 2 bedrooms?
There are limitations that say no more than 20% of the units can be 1 bedroom. No fewer than 20% must be 3 bedroom, and the balance can be whatever we work out in between all those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Frank, it's Lou. I have a question.
Yes, Liz.
I was really pleased with section B, architectural design standards. I think it's great we put that in there, but could you explain number 2, the last sentence, buildings should include substantial variation, blah, blah, blah. Could you explain what that means?
We're always afraid when there's a significant massive building that it ends up looking like a blockade or a barracks kind of arrangement. So these offsets or these altered distances from the road for different portions of the building assure that it can feel like it's not just one big mass. Does that
Okay.
answer your question? Or
Well, the word entabulation, I don't even know how to say that word. What does that word mean?
I'm trying to find where you are right now.
Architectural design standards,
I think he's in the ordinance.
number
Okay.
2. Yeah,
What-
in the
okay.
ordinance. Number
Thank
2, the last sentence of number 2.
Entablature.
Entablature?
Yeah. It's like a cornice.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah, right.
We'll be working more on that whole section, Lou, especially as we talk about these design issues. Okay, so
Okay.
keep that as kind of a placeholder,
Right.
and we may be even talking about including some designs, some pictures.
Tom, this is where we would incorporate exhibits, schedules, perhaps some renderings and things like this. Some of the visioning that we've been tossing back and forth could very well be incorporated into this document.
Yeah, so it's not too customary to put pictures or designs right into a ordinance, but to some extent, I'm satisfied that we might and we can. It's also somewhat more customary to put them into the master plan amendment, which we might do as well, or as a way to create a foundation of what we're looking for. But that'll be.
If Mr. Collins, if we were to adopt this, whoever was going to develop the property, I'm assuming KRE, they would more than likely have to become before this board to get whatever plans approved, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Here, let me go over those steps a little bit. Frank sort of did it, but basically, we're at the stage of what we're talking about as a master plan amendment, and that amendment might, if you adopt it after notice and a public hearing, it would constitute the planning board's master plan and the land use element, the future land use map change, the housing element change or amendments of the planning board's master plan. If that happened, you would also perhaps recommend a draft ordinance to the township committee with that. And because we like to do it this way and it makes things more convenient, there probably will be a master plan reexamination report, which I think you used recently for something, but basically it just is a restatement of what they look at these certain questions. Then you recommend that to the governing body. Well, you adopt it. If you adopt it, it's your master plan. The governing body doesn't do the master plan. Only the board does the master plan. Then the governing body thinks about it and decides whether to introduce the ordinance with the way you wrote it or recommended it, or perhaps their own way or their own changes. And they then refer it to you for a consistency review. Seems a little bit like ping pong, but that's the way it works. You go and you look at whether what they introduced is now consistent with your master plan. If it happens to be the same documents, it will be absolutely consistent because you basically recommended it. We won't get complicated about that. There's some other options there. Basically, then you report to the committee that it is consistent with the master plan. If it did do that, they then have a public hearing at which they adopt it. After it becomes effective, an applicant like the owner of KRE or whoever was their applicant could make an application, and they would have to make it for preliminary and final site plan and any related variances to seek what they would like to build. And that would presumably be substantially consistent with the ordinance. And if not, it would need variances, hopefully no D variances, but basically whatever variances it needed, the board would hear. And if the board approved it, it would then be possible for it to be built, provided all other governmental approvals were obtained. So it's a multi-stage process, but this is the foundation. And this is a good point to be looking at, well, what do you want it to look like? And Frank's gonna talk about that. And And you are, the board members are too. So,
So the ordinance
you.
is not the place where we would put those schedules, Tom? The master plan,
It's the-
the
I'm-
revised master
I'm-
plan is where they would be?
I'm a little bit different than other attorneys, and I generally feel that you can have objective pictures or designs in an ordinance. And so and I'm willing to do that if we get some, let's call it, cooperation on it from the board members and the committee members and even from the applicant, maybe just sort of what it is that we are envisioning. Sometimes you need some flexibility in that because obviously you want to be able to make it better or make it flexible for the board to be able to say, I'd really like this or I'd like that. And
In the past,
sometimes
we've talked about everything from, some mild suggestions to, what do we call it, Frank? Almost pattern design, right? So, we can be very explicit or we can provide great latitude, but in the interest of time, effort, and money on our part, as well as everybody else in the process, I just feel like the more specific we are, the less it becomes, like howitzer practice.
Historical Preservation Committee would have something to say too, I would think, no?
Well, we'll talk some more about that, but I don't believe we're in a historic preservation district or in an area specifically. So the role will be advisory, I believe, if and to the extent the board seeks their input. And I'm not saying either way. I defer to the board on this. I'm pretty sure it's not in the historic district. But that doesn't, so what would that mean? That means that they wouldn't see it as a site plan and a historic preservation commission certificate of authenticity or whatever it is in that.
Well, I seem to remember them having input on the school that is supposedly going in across the street there too.
That's true, but I believe that it might be, Frank would help more on the details of
Different
that.
zone.
That is in the village neighborhood district, and it might be in a historic preservation
I
district.
guess Bird Mills is probably the dividing line between the two.
Frank might know. I think it might be, but they're
It is.
they're not always the
I'm trying to
same
look it
as
up right
exactly
now.
like
Give me a second.
the districts.
At the other map too that was on his.
There's a map
But
right in there.
I definitely think that we care about the historic preservation ideas, and so but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because what we want to do with you is, let's say, talk about concepts and planning, and then perhaps get your idea, hear some of Frank's information, then hear the board members perhaps, and then maybe the property owner and the public. And this may be an iterative process, okay? Interactive process.
Battery 90%.
Didn't hear you, Anna.
Ann, are you speaking?
You're muted. Oh, okay.
No?
Who was that?
Somebody's
I
got 90%.
think it was somebody's
or
phone
something.
running out of battery.
Yeah.
So
Hope it's not mine.
Frank, you want to continue?
It's the fire alarm.
Actually, maybe it was Tom because he just went off.
No, I'm
There you go.
still here.
Let's get back to Frank. Frank, let's
go.
go. Come on.
Frank?
So, Carol, should I move on to the part of our discussion here?
Yes.
Okay, so I need to be able to share the screen. So I can put up the slideshow.
Share screen.
Okay.
Frank, you're going over your 25-page deck?
What?
That 25-page deck you had?
What I sent earlier today, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yes, it's today's email attachments from Frank.
Right, and I'm trying to figure out how to share it here. And I've never done that before, so
If
I
you
don't.
scroll to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a red button that says share screen.
Green, but I push that button and then it brings me up and says basic, advanced, or files. And when I go to files, which is where I want to be, it doesn't show me a file. It doesn't show me any reference to my files.
Have his file, you could bring it up.
You have the PDF open, Frank?
Do I have the PDF open?
Yeah, the one you want to share, the one you sent us today. I think you have to have that open, not Larry's.
Larry doing?
There you go. Okay.
That work, Frank. I'll share it and you just tell me when to change pages.
Right.
Okay,
Thank
we
you,
got
Paul.
it.
Bingo. There you go. Okay.
There we are.
Thank you.
Good thing trial run.
Yes.
So this first page, Paul was kind enough to send me this map this morning and reminded me of the particularly distinguished historic character that the village has as the place where the original West Point, I guess is how they talk about it, was. So if we can, and so that's a frame of reference that we can come back to and look at later, but what we're going to talk about a little bit are some of the concepts that would go into the kind of placemaking that we hope we can do here. Or let me put it this way. My objective here is to guide you through a discussion about the difference between urban and rural. I think everybody knows that Bedminster prides itself on being a rural place. The countryside is one of the great features, but the villages are also one of the great features. And in the topology of place, villages are urban as opposed to rural. The hamlets and villages are the smallest scale of urban places. But the question is really, as we infill development in a village, what is the right kind of choice for us to make about that? So this first slide is really just to talk about having some ambition for the kinds of things that you would be looking to have happen in a great place, that it would become more sociable and walkable in part, that the kind of uses and activities that would occur there would be the things that bring people together, that from an image standpoint, it would be attractive and people would want to be there because it had clean and green and other elements about the space that they liked. And the linkages and the access really relates a lot to sidewalks, pedestrian connections, as well as the traffic that we're going to be dealing with when we talk about improvements to the intersection. Next, Paul. If you look at that quote on the top, I don't think any of us really think of our pedestrian experience in Pluckerman as one of those streets that you wander down, where there's a wonderful pedestrian experience, partly because traffic sort of owns that part of the highway. The buildings are very close to the street. There is not a great opportunity for things like outdoor dining between the buildings and the road, the state highway. But when we think of streets that have this pleasant feeling to them, part of our ambition, I think, at this point is to try to envision a way that we enhance Pluckerman Village, make it feel a lot of the things that the state plan is trying to encourage. And these principles that they're talking about here, very much like that wheel we just looked at, we're looking for high quality design. We're not looking for phony cologne, as they say. We're not trying to imitate the space we're in. We're trying to interpret at a scale that makes sense what attractive, desirable infill development would look like in the 21st century. Next, Paul. If we look at some guiding principles that involve respecting the site, I've always felt, and we've talked about this in the past, that there was sort of a unsecured opportunity along this frontage. We had a site that was built out with everything that's on it already, the parking in the building, and yet we had a piece of the village that was really not a piece of the village because it was vacant land. So if we think about the site, when we talk about respecting the site, we want to think of how it connects to the village across the street and the village up the road. We want to be sensitive to the kind of buildings in the neighborhood, the setback of the buildings, the scale of the building. This building is going to be a lot bigger than any of these Revolutionary era houses. So we can't kid ourselves into thinking that we're going to make it look like the old village. But when we talk about a respectful design concept, it's going to be built around some essential characteristics of the neighborhood that we want to reinforce as opposed to other characteristics. So when I said initially that the question of urban and rural is one that we need to confront, the question of urban and suburban is the other question we need to deal with. If you think about it, and we'll look at, Paul, why don't you keep moving here? If we look at some of the imagery about the village, here we are right across the street. That in the lower right-hand corner, we're looking at the bank and that long driveway, which is essentially it ends up right in the area where this new development will be occurring, and part of that driveway has to move because of that. Across the street, I'm showing you that the distance, the setback to that somewhat further setback single-family dwelling is 44 feet from the sidewalk. If we go to the next couple of drawings, you'll see these other measurements down at the bottom of the page that talk about 11.74 feet, and that's on those two little white dots where it says 206. The first
Will you
time.
make that even bigger, Paul?
You can, with your, you can make it, expand it yourself on your screen.
Yeah, you can. No.
Or if you don't like it, Paul, you can just go to the next slide. That's all right.
Okay.
So
how
one
about
of the
bigger?
One of the things that you see when you look at this particular image, I don't think you need a whole lot more detail. The buildings are very close to the street. No building has parking in the front yard except the shopping center or the gas station, or if you go up the road, the Hills Shopping Center. So the pattern in this village, and I remember quite a long time ago, I was a young person. It was before any of the Hills started. And I wandered through town by mistake one time. And I remember counting handfuls of buildings in this. I had no idea about the Pluckerman Artillery or any of the real history, but I could tell this was a really old place and it was a really small scale place. And other than that shopping center on the corner, it was pretty much what had been here for a very long time. So our job here is not to try to imitate so much what's been here, but the tough questions we're going to ask about whether more urban, where you might have a sidewalk and on-street parking, as opposed to suburban, where you would have clear off-street parking arrangements that would prevent the sidewalk from being right at the street, where the storefront cafe seating outside would be at the edge of the road. And these are not, it's not that there are any right answers here. Next one, Paul. Because they're really not a question of right and wrong. It's really a question of what you think is going to fit best in Pluckerman Village. And this is where the planning board has a lot of deliberating to do. If I knew the right answer, I probably wouldn't tell you anyway, because it's supposed to be your answer, but I don't know the right answer, honestly. I think this process will deliver up a good answer by the time we're done. So here's another example that just reinforces the fact that all of the historic development in the village has been very close to the road. We're in a designated center under the state plan. Hasn't gotten us a whole lot of benefits so far. It seems like they just keep making us work harder for it. But nonetheless, it's an area where the state, especially in planning areas 4 and 5, it's the kind of an area where the state promotes growth as opposed to trying to discourage it, which they're doing throughout the rest of the township. So the pattern of pre-existing development has buildings very close to the road without parking in the front yard. It also has buildings that are relatively narrow in width and small in scale. That's the nature of the place. Next, Paul. Part of what we want to do when we add to this place is interpret what's going to happen next with a lot of attention to those details that we're talking about there, because they will really pay off in the long run in how the place functions. So the lighting, the landscaping, hardscape is a very important part of these kinds of developments. Circulation, given the fact that we're at the trickiest intersection in town, I think, that's going to need a lot of help for everybody to be happy when we're done here. Circulation on-site and off-site is a big issue. Parking, as I mentioned before, on-site and off-site, we need to talk about. And walkability. Next, Paul. If you look at some of the places that you know that are relatively close to home, on-street parking in these villages is not uncommon. And for me to suggest on-street parking at the intersection of Burnt Mills Road and Route 206 sounds like lunacy, I realize. But given the fact that this site has the ability for us to shave out the space for that parking, not to try to stick it in the right of way we have now, but to make a reasonable opportunity for that, you need to think as one of the options that could happen, that you could have an arrangement where there are parking spaces next to a very wide sidewalk and a building that comes after that sidewalk. And we'll look at some more images. Go ahead, Paul. Again, just more examples of the way cars have been accommodated in historic village settings. Go ahead. Same thing. Happens. This is Hopewell Borough. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at are a series of images. And I think the most valuable part of this part of the discussion won't necessarily happen tonight. But if people could identify which slides, and I hope the pages are numbered. If they're not, I'll send them to you numbered. But if you could tell us the images that really resonate with you. So, and I'll just tell you a few things as I look at each of these. I tried to keep them at the scale that we are thinking will happen here, so that they're not downtown city kind of scapes. But in any event, this is a building that uses a lot of brick, has a very distinctive first floor retail element, is broken up by these facade setbacks that we were talking about before when Nick asked that question, so that even though it's a big, long building, it feels more like separate pieces of the building rather than one big mass. Next. The ability to work on a corner gives us lots of different opportunities we don't have here, but I'm more interested in whether architectural details from any of these particular details in any event find real favor with you, where you look at something you think, boy, that would be really interesting if we could do that next. I do think that, you know, this is a cityscape, so this is not downtown Pluckerman, and there's a sidewalk with restaurant seating on either side of the sidewalk before you get to the parking. That's not my ambition for this site, but the concept that we have this kind of a relationship between the building, the people on the sidewalks, and the street is one of the things I'm trying to communicate with that image. Next. And this one. I mean, there are a lot of these outdoor dining examples. I'm told that if we do this right, we can even have the same trees they have here. Next, Paul. And so some of these images, which are, you know, imaginings, do help you to get a bit of a feeling for different architectural senses of scale and place, and the use of things like in this one, for instance, the awnings I thought you'd either like or not like, and that might be something you'd comment on. Next, Paul. I think I did too many of these. Again, parking, this is very much like, go back to that one for 1 second, Paul, I'm sorry. Very much like what we might envision here, where you might have that relationship between outdoor dining, the sidewalk, some landscaping, and parking on the street. Go ahead. Again, just another architectural example of how to put a building that has some relief and variety in its facade into the mix. Next. When we look at some of these urban design studies, they look at things like the scale and the distribution of different features on the building, the bay width, whether there's outdoor seating, and whether it's protected by the way it's provided. They're all things, if we're going to get into a more urban context where the building approaches the street and the sidewalk and on-street parking would be features, we might look at details like this. And again, if you're looking at a different paradigm, one that might be more suburban, then you would do something different. Next one. More of those kinds of reminders of modulation and material differentiation, and how you might use scale changes so that the massing breaks up a big mass into something that reads differently. Next. And when we talk about rebuilding or building back into historic settings, there's always a tendency to want to make things look like the old stuff, because that's the kind of place it is. And unfortunately, historic preservationists find that to be exactly the wrong approach. So you really always want the new fabric to be clearly distinguishable from the historic fabric, but to be sympathetic in scale, materials usage, volume, those kinds of massing, those kinds of details that make it feel like it fits. And this is just one example of how a modern interpretation of an old style is the kind of example I'm talking about. Not that that's beautiful. The modern row house there isn't necessarily special and all, but what it shows you is that the same kind of a design format can be interpreted with more modern materials and designs. Next. If we do it right, there might be the opportunity for there to be some emerging nightlife downtown, because there might be some elements in this space that create some excitement that we don't have right now, partly because all of the buildings we have are very small. The Pluckerman Inn is kind of the nightlife place in town, and outside of that, there's nothing calling for your attention. We would hope that there would be more than one restaurant at the end of the day at this location, and hopefully some fine dining that would make coming out to this part of town more and more attractive to people. We have a giant audience up the hill at the hills, despite the rest of the Somerset Hills. So I think with the right idea about creating some excitement here, this could be a really interesting and unique part of the village next fall. And these are just some examples in looking at some other urban design concepts of the ways that things have been interpreted. And I don't know that these are actually extremely useful to us right now. Let's go to the next one. So here's another 3-story. The differentiation in the buildings, even though this is all one project, gives it the feeling of being more modular in scale. And whenever you're in a small scale place, large scale buildings are the most out of place. So taking something large and breaking it down more is a good idea. Next. The mixture. What happened there?
I like that one.
Me too.
I've been waiting for somebody to like something here.
I like that
I
one.
like that one.
Okay.
I also
like
like
wood.
the rendering on page 16.
Okay, well, part of the reason I threw that in there is because some of these eclectic designs that look like a series of older buildings put together, if they don't try to mimic historic details, can be really interesting things that are partly interesting because they're not what you would expect to see, because they do offer you some, in this case, for instance, the opposing gable facing the street on the right, the shed roof to the right of that opposing gable, the flat roof next to it with the front porch. Those are all the kinds of elements that could be combined in a building that's probably going to end up being 100 feet long or longer in a way that they could be elegant. So, that's one of the things we wanted to talk about. Next, Paul.
No.
I'm just going to let Richard write yes or no on every picture.
I'll just do this.
Looks like my father's grade school.
Okay, next. And we're almost done, Richard. I won't torture you anymore. But thinking that we're going to be operating at 3 stories, it's just good to try to think in a 3-story vocabulary. So again, this is imagery, and if anything resonates about it, that's part of what I'm looking to hear. Next, Paul.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that last one looks like a retirement village.
Okay, fair enough. How about this one?
Too tall.
Yeah, the 4-story part, you're right. That's too big. You're right. Okay, next.
When you lay out some of the criteria or the
Looks like the green of Morristown.
when you lay out the criteria or the design parameters here, aren't some planning standards built around light and air and things like that? Some of these things that are so tall. Because one of the things that we had brain damage on the Elite project was the sheer scaling, the massing, the context, etc. Mm-hmm. So as we strive to reduce the scale of that project, we became more and more sensitive, I feel like, to the issues of context, et cetera. So when we see something like this one, it just seems like it's, even though it's only 3 stories, it's, there's no light. There's no light, there's no air. The temperature on one side of the street could be 10 degrees lower than on the other side of the street because of the shadow cast by this building. So, light and air is something that I think goes to your respect for the neighborhood. It goes to the, the context of what's in place. Even the brick, although brick is ordinarily a residential material, there's not much brick down there other than the office buildings. Most of the stuff is more of the clapboard stuff that we saw in the few slides earlier.
Right.
Again, I'm talking about a couple different things, but light and air is like the first thing that comes to mind, and which is why I was liking the rendering on slide 16, because it seemed like, at least on the one side of the street, allowed for some open space in between some of the buildings, and maybe since this is such a narrow shot, there's no opportunity for that, but.
No, but this is kind of franchise architecture, I think. This is the sort of thing that a lot of towns will find acceptable, but there's really nothing distinctive about it.
Frank, the thing that I notice about this building versus the slide 16 that everybody sort of liked is that while there's variation in the texture and the material, the face of the building is all at the same depth.
Yeah, one plane.
The other slide had more variation in terms of depth from the street or the sidewalk. And I think that helped in the feeling of it not being imposing on the landscape.
No, I agree with Anna and Rich. I mean, I think that this building kind of reads, even with all the different things going on, as one building, whereas the other one was successful in looking like separate little buildings, kind of like a village. Which is one of the things I think really hit me the most about slide 16. So even if it is one building and doesn't look like a single building, I think that's what makes it successful.
Right. Great. Those are really good comments. Thank you. And I think we're almost at the end here, Paul. What else you got left there? Okay. I put this one in part just because the idea of having balconies overhanging the streetscape could be appealing. I think you have to think about whether that kind of a feature on the front of the building, if you lived there, would you want that space to go hang out? People almost always would rather have a balcony than not have one, almost even if it's a dumpster view. So I'm not suggesting that you necessarily would like this, but I put that in there just to give you a feeling for something that's not trying to look colonial or stylistically distinctive in any way. I think there's one more, right, Paul? Yeah. So one of the things we have to think about when we come through this process is that this is a choice you're going to make that's going to be durable. If we do a good job and use good materials and great design, we'll be happy that it's there. It's going to be there for 50 years, more than likely. So part of our job would be to respect the historic character without trying to imitate it, which we're not supposed to do. We'll be addressing the affordable housing needs. I believe there's a real benefit in providing attractive luxury apartments, both for the empty nesters who would like to stay in town and be happy if they could sell their house, and for the younger up and coming people who will fall in love with your town while they live in one of these apartments and ultimately buy a house in town. And it's not necessarily trying to create a feeder system, but having young, affluent people that are probably getting the right kind of jobs in the region moving into your town is never a bad thing. Clearly, we want this project to improve traffic flow and safety at the intersection, and that's been a sort of a given from the start of the conversation. And it gives us an opportunity to expand local businesses, hopefully to help fill in maybe some of the gaps that'll make the village a more attractive place for people to come and do more than one shopping trip. So those are some concepts I'd like you to think about tonight. I'd be really happy for people to just tell me the slides that you really like, that you think we should try to work from. But I also recognize that we don't own this property. And we're going to do a collaborative effort with a developer who I'm happy to be able to work with here in a place that I think can make this a great part of Pluckerman Village. So I think we're going to need to hear what they're thinking as well. But I do think, as I said at the outset, the choice between urban and suburban, and urban is such a dirty word, but if you think village, when I say urban, if you think fabric and scale of a village as what is urban, then the urban that we're trying to replicate here is responsible to that fabric and scale, is trying to be really synergistic and not look like a piece of something else dropped in from somewhere. If what you think is that that is not going to be something you can pull off credibly, I want you to make sure that you're very clear with your fellow board members that you need to make a really good choice about something that you're going to be happy to look at for a long time. And so we've started with this series of images. Thanks for letting me put you through all that. I'm happy to take any questions or to hear any other contributions to the conversation.
Frank, my question is, Bedminster by its name and by definition has historically been either, a farmstead or a bedroom community in so many ways. And when I say bedroom community, I mean, you work someplace else and you sleep here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard so much over the last 4 or 5 years or so that I've been on the board about trying to create or support our commercial development, to support our rateables by enabling them to create, and not just in our town, by enabling them to create these live, work, play type of environments. So that's a definite departure from my perspective, from the way historically people have looked at Bedminster. We had some struggles with Elite, which was very small. This is going to be more dramatic, and will, in my mind, signal, almost a new direction. Now we can hold on to our bedroom community status and watch our taxes become like Basking Ridge and in some other towns that have not been able to kind of embrace this kind of change, and see property taxes increased, 1.5 times, 2 times, et cetera, because I believe that's what will happen if we don't. Or we can try to manage this process, which I think we're all here committed to try to do, but I understand, and we're going to probably get a lot of pushback from a lot of people who perceive Bedminster in a particular way, don't understand the consequence perhaps of not taking action, and all that stuff was outlined a couple of years ago in the master plan review. These are our challenges. We're trying to address them here, but I understand that we don't own the property. The developers are asking us to change our ordinances or otherwise grant variances in order to accommodate some of these changes. But how do we do that in a way where, again, I'm not trying to tell somebody what to do with their property, but by the same token, they're asking us to change dramatically the way our township is viewed.
Yeah, and you get to make the decision about how you want your township to change now. As I said, this is a fully built out site. So if you don't decide to change the zoning, then the FAR is already used up. So what we're doing here is collaboratively, we're going to develop a concept that should reinforce the feeling about what kind of place we have here. If you think, we talked about this a little bit during the Elite application. If you think about it, if you went back 50 years, every one of these buildings in town had somebody living in them, either upstairs or the whole building. Same thing in Bedminster Village. Go up and down Main Street now and tell me how many units have somebody living in them or upstairs in either of those places. We basically eviscerated the Main Street, eyes on the street, lifestyle of living on Main Street. And this is a project that gives us an opportunity to bring people back into town like this, where they'll wake up, get out of their unit, and with a little luck, they'll figure out they can walk across the street and everything they want is right down the block. So and that'll happen whether there's a suburban design or a more context-sensitive design. I think that's a choice that's going to have to be made. But the other thing, Richard, you're talking about the level of control that the town can exert. And nobody's talked about a redevelopment plan here, and there's no redevelopment characteristics off the top of my head I can tell you would qualify under. But the difference between our zoning that we're going to do now and a redevelopment plan is the difference between a finely tailored code and a straitjacket. Okay, in the zoning we're going to do, we can write a lot of good provisions that'll guide something into pretty much the right direction. But in a redevelopment plan, we can more or less dictate what has to happen if they want to build something. So I'm not suggesting that we would try to make it a redevelopment area, but we just have to recognize the difference in our ability to control all the knobs, make everything work one way
So for
versus the other.
AT&T, we can create the straitjacket, and for this one, we're just talking about a finely tailored suit.
I didn't say I could never qualify for redevelopment. Don't get the wrong idea. But
Frank, I have a question. What's the best way to get our ideas across to you in an email?
Yeah, I would only suggest the same caution Tom does, where we don't do group emails to everybody, but any one of you that has any suggestions, if you email me, I will catalog those together so that when I send a revised draft, I will account for all those comments. That would be great. That's a very efficient way to do it.
And if you would copy me on it, Lou, or other board members, that would be convenient, maybe Paul too.
Yeah, Paul.
But don't send it to a group of board members, just send it to your professionals, one by yourself to us.
Okay.
But also this meeting is great. This is planning. What you've just done is and what Rich described is, and what some of your comments have been, are what this is all about. And it's your community. It's your place. You know it best. And you get to write master plan and recommended ordinances that declare the requirements in objective ways of how you want your land in your village and your community to look. And that's planning, and it's great to do it now in this master plan process, which is an interactive process. And we expect we might hear from KRE about some of their ideas, which hopefully mesh with some of your ideas, and that will be a collaborative, iterative process. And maybe there's somebody from the public who has some ideas, and they'll tell us those, and you'll be interacting and getting information. And so take advantage of this. This is a master plan amendment potentially leading to a zoning ordinance amendment, which is different than a D variance because it's focused on the master plan and an ordinance and possibly changing an ordinance. And it's your discretionary authority to amend the master plan and your discretionary authority to recommend an ordinance. And then it's the governing body, the committee's discretionary authority, whether to even adopt what you recommend. Okay, so it's a multi-step process and continues to be interactive. So it's a great opportunity to plan. And I'm very impressed by your statements and your comments, and I think you all have a great understanding of this process, and that's exciting.
I have one question. How much of this detail can go into an ordinance that we're discussing?
Yeah,
I
that's
gather
a great question.
that's really separate from the ordinance. It's more for discussion with the Kushner organization, I guess.
Well, it's a discussion, Nick, but as long as your standards are objective and authorized by the municipal land use law, and I'm pretty confident that there's great authority in the municipal land use law for objective standards, including objective architectural design requirements. As long as you do that in a understandable way in the ordinance, it is law, and it becomes law through the ordinance. A lot of times we don't put detailed pictures in an ordinance, but increasingly the concepts have incorporated pictures and designs, at least for examples. And there's a whole doctrine of which I don't think we're going to apply here, but it's the use of plan development form-based code principles, which actually try to establish the design, through a zoning ordinance, not a redevelopment ordinance. The reason I don't think it'll be necessary or appropriate here is because we have a discrete area that we are looking at. It's only a limited number of acres, and we know what exists in the existing buildings on the site and nearby, and we can fine tune without a form-based code. Form-based code is basically a conceptual concept that you would just set the form and not pick the uses, not decide the uses. That any use could go in any portion of any form. That theoretically sounds creative, but it isn't needed here, I don't think. And it probably is better to know where uses will be on this particular section of Bedminster. Okay, and that's why I don't think you need form-based code. But form-based code helps you see it, and helps you know that you have authority through zoning to regulate many different aspects of construction.
I think we may have just lost Tom.
We got to freeze.
Ready for this? No, so they're moving.
No, can you guys hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you, but I think Tom is gone.
So, while Tom is still talking about form-based zoning, and he may be doing so for a few more minutes, I just want to follow up on some of the issues that Frank presented and for consideration of the board as we proceed with this process. Certainly, if there are things you like, let Frank know. Also, let Frank know if there are things you really do not like. And I think by some of the facial gestures we saw from some of the board members, I think we had some of those types of reaction to some of the presentation materials. So let Frank know if there are things you don't like. Oh, there he is. Tom's back.
Tom's back.
Tom, take yourself off mute. All right. So are you done with the form-based zoning little detour, and you're still on mute?
Little detour.
I'm trying. Sorry to bore you, but I'm sorry I got disconnected somehow. But my point is, you have great authority. Take advantage of it.
So Nick, the answer is yes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Put in, whether it's drawings or get into that level. It's been done before. We haven't done it here, but it can be done.
Is there anybody else on the board that would like to make a comment about the amendment itself? If you have comments, I know Nick, he's going to send his comments to Frank. If there's anybody else.
From the ordinance itself?
Yes. Well, not the ordinance, but for the amendment
Okay.
that Frank has written. If there's any more comments from the board, either now or if you're going to, you intend to send them to Frank.
But comments on the board or red lines, whatever we do, Carol, they should be sent to the board at large, or are those directed only to Frank too?
Frank right now, because then Frank can address them and either agree with you or disagree with you or add them to the amendment, and he can give us another draft.
Okay.
Right. I'll compile them all with a track change version, easy to read. And if I don't incorporate a suggestion, I'll give you a reason why.
Right.
Or two, if you need
That's
two.
fair. Okay.
Is that clear so that everybody understands?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Same thing with your comments as the mayor has said. with your comments for the actual architectural, what you like, what you don't like, tell Frank so he can, either embellish it or, continue in that direction, or maybe take things out of there that we just don't even want to consider. This is, as Tom has said, this is a process that we're going to be going through, and we're going to, hopefully make it the best we can make it for our community.
Do we
Anybody?
want to set a deadline for sending stuff to Frank?
If you could get it
A
to me
month
in
from
the next,
now or 2 weeks from now or
in
whatever?
the next week or two would be great.
Okay.
So I can get it back for our meeting next month.
Next week, we won't be discussing this, but we'll try to get it back on the agenda to keep it rolling, so it's,
Right.
stagnant.
Great.
Right. Frank needs some time to work through everything we send.
Not so much, really. I can get it all done in the next 2 weeks if I have the comments.
Yeah,
Thank you.
let's keep it fresh in our minds while we're thinking about it,
Yeah.
Good.
Amen.
That's fine.
Have something else, Mayor?
No, I just want to say, I know we've got the representatives from KRE, the property owner. So maybe it's probably a good time to turn it over to them. They have not been on video, but presumably they've been listening and have seen Frank's presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, are they on there?
Yep, they are on there,
I didn't
so-
know that they were there.
so they're
Okay, we
waving.
certainly could open it up to,
All right, so
yeah, I will, yeah.
Oh,
Does anybody want to speak for,
Great. Yeah, hi. I'm Noah. I know I've been in front of the board and met many of the members. It's nice to see everybody again. And Frank, thank you for the presentation. If you would have just sent me your Choose Wisely slide, you'd have saved me about a half hour today in my preparation of these comments. So I will gloss over those real quick. But, this has been a process that we have watched and on the periphery participated in as the board has considered updating its master plan for many of the purposes that Rich outlined. And that Frank showed in his presentation with the enhancement of the public space with amenities, both for the village and also for the commercial spaces, the strengthening of rateables, the provision of a sort of a new luxury product type in town, both for empty nesters and younger folks. So, and the fulfillment of COA obligations, as well as the realignment of traffic and the improvement of traffic. So I don't need to dwell on those things. But, we stepped back also after having done some initial thinking on this site. And I think that, the board has seen a previous concept plan from us and has seen some previous architecture as well that I think was, while we liked it, I think it skewed a little more toward what Frank called, and I'm going to get it right here, franchise architecture, a term that I had not heard before, but that when I look back at our drawings, that's really, it's clear that that's what it seems like, especially compared to some of the images that Frank showed and some that we've put together as well. And so I think that as we sort of reassessed and thought about that, as the board has pursued on a separate track, this re-examination here and its thinking, and has now come to the point where design criteria are being considered for the zoning, for the writing of the zoning, we wanted to take a fresh look at what this could be. And we wanted to re-examine this franchise architecture and see if we could get something better. And I think that we really think that there are ways, and we're pretty excited about it actually, to envision a contemporary form of colonialism. So something that meets the scale, something with the light and air, but that brings a real fresh take and could be a really exciting placemaking opportunity here. And that we think can be done both in the site plan, which you'll see we've re-examined with a couple critical moves, and in the architecture itself. Wanting to make this an exciting new piece of the village and one that's going to draw attention and pedestrian traffic to it, both from the village and also from the neighboring parks and of course from the neighboring commercial office buildings as well, providing an amenity for folks to go and have lunch or a drink after work. I'm not going to go on and on about that because I do want to introduce Mark Kushner, but I do want to pick up on one point because you're going to see it in our slides, and we did a lot of thinking about this just as Frank, it seems, did, and that is urban versus rural. I think what you're going to see in a lot of our slides come from urban contexts, but we're pretty convinced that while we might not go that far out, we can take some exciting elements of more contemporary and urban placemaking and bring them into the village scale and the village vernacular with a contemporary take on it. And so while you're going to see some of that context here, we really believe that it can be translated, with the board's help appropriately for the site. So briefly, Mark Kushner is here. Mark, as you can tell from the last name, it has an interest in the company. But also Mark runs an independent architecture firm, ran Hollowich Kushner for many years, and now runs a firm, Major Architecture. And so Mark and I work very closely on many of our projects in the planning and architecture stages, and Mark and his firm do all of the design architecture for all of our buildings. And so we've put together a little presentation which walks through context, some design precedents, and then gets into a little bit of contemporary colonial, and then finally a relook at what we think a more exciting site plan could be. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark with that. I want to again thank the board and all the professionals for so much of the thoughtful consideration here. So I'm going to go on mute again. Thank you, and it's nice to see everybody. And I think Mark will likely share his screen here as we go through, and it's a brief presentation, maybe 10 slides here. So looking forward to the feedback, and I will turn it over here.
Great. Thanks. No, I'm not on mute, am I? Everyone can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you're good.
We can hear you.
And you can see my screen too?
Yes.
Yes.
We are doing great then in that case. Okay. Thank you, everyone on the board. Thank you, Mayor and the professionals. It's really a pleasure to, honestly, to talk about architecture with such a lead-in, such a thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate it. Noah, you learned a new term, franchise architecture. I learned a new term too, phony colony. Thank you. I'm going to use that. That's great. So I think we're very much aligned. When we took this step back and we came back to look at this site, we really wanted to make sure that we created a direction that was unique to Bedminster. Bedminster is a unique place, and we thought that we had an opportunity to create a project that spoke directly to the architectural heritage of the place and tied in a couple of like these loose ends, this urban, rural, dense, very, very not dense, agrarian kind of feeling with this one project. So some initial thoughts that we had about Bedminster. Some of these might be cliched. This is kind of like a Google thought process of when you think of Bedminster architecture, what do you think of? Obviously, there's a real colonial history here. There's also an amazing 1920s colonial history here. Gable roofs, dormers, fieldstone, clapboard, shutters. And we want to make sure that we take some of these vernacular forms and that we include them into the architecture as we move forward, but not in a kind of ersatz, copycat kind of way, that we make sure to create something contemporary out of this rich colonial heritage. So taking a look a little closer at Pluckerman Village, I think the density and the idea that the buildings are on the street are by far.
Mark, if you're, are you going through the slides? Because if so, they're not moving.
Oh, okay. Are you not? Oh, you can't see what I'm doing? Let me.
We're still seeing the title screen.
Okay. Then you don't know what I'm talking about. Let me, here, can you see me now?
There we go.
Okay. Here, I'll just hide this so you can't see what's coming. There we go. Make it bigger. There we go. Can everyone see that now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So everything I've said to date, I was referencing this slide, and this is Pluckerman Village, which you know much better than I do. I took an hour or two to walk around. I'd been there previously, and the forms, the colonial forms, resonate, both historical and contemporary, which I think there are some really successful examples of just architecture, not really the planning portion of it, but making substantial place. And then I think, like Frank was talking about, making this connection between the road and the building a close and intimate connection. And obviously, we'll talk about the placement of the building in the master plan. One thing that struck me in looking at contemporary development in Bedminster was this project, the Somerset Hills Learning Institute, which I thought was a very nice project in its use of vernacular forms in a kind of dense setting. Obviously, it's a school; it's not a one-to-one example, but yeah, its use of siding, nice tall two-story spaces, and then when you move inside the building, you actually get to experience those spaces as authentic architectural experiences, not like a gable on the outside and then you walk into a drop ceiling, actually feeling that architectural heritage on a one-to-one personal level. So those are some ideas that we picked up from the local Bedminster community. And what we kind of think our challenge here is to bridge this gap. I mentioned like loose ties. So behind the project, or depends where you're sitting, but on one side of the project is Bed 1. This amazingly classic 80s example of a corporate office building, very beautiful in its own right. But on the other side is the colonial history of Pluckerman Village. And our site, I think, has the responsibility to kind of tie the two together and create this new contemporary version of the colonial heritage of Bedminster. In plan, what we think is really important is to pull all of those strands together. So here's Bed 1, here's Bedminster 1, and we definitely want to make sure that we give an opportunity to include the office workers as part of this master plan and have them be able to walk over through our property to Pluckerman Village and create that experience. How great would it be if during lunchtime in great weather, they would leave the office building that's kind of hermetically sealed, not get in their car, walk through our project, grab lunch, grab coffee in Pluckerman Village, and then walk back to Bed 1. So that during the daytime, we're activating this entire spine. On weekends, we want to make sure, or maybe people are riding their bikes not on weekends, we want to connect to Burnt Mills Park, make sure that we have a really gracious entry to everyone that's using those amenities and in the Pluckerman Park next door. And then make sure that we have a pedestrian connection, these green lines connecting to Pluckerman Village. So our site is here, as you all know, and we'll be using this existing curb cut and this existing curb cut from this access road that goes around our property. So now I'm going to show you pretty much exactly like what Frank just did. I'm just going to do it on a few less slides. Some inspiration, some ideas that we have about what this site could be. I'm going to start off by showing you some programmatic ideas that are going to look too urban. It's really about the idea of the relationship of people to architecture and place more than any specific architecture. And then I'll show you some architectural design precedents. So when we think about the public realm here and bringing the density of a couple hundred apartments to this site, we want to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to leave their apartments and occupy the street level like the village that Frank was talking about. So we thought about places like Bethesda Row, which does a really good job in new construction of creating a retail food and beverage experience, using lights for placemaking and outdoor furniture to create an intimate experience in what's a new development. Here in Seattle, same thing. This is a 3-story residential building on top of retail, and you can see how the cafe spills out very much how Frank was talking about through the use of detailed landscaping, urban furniture, umbrellas, and lighting. More locally, the Urby here in Harrison, New Jersey, I think speaks very much to what we're trying to accomplish here. And this I think speaks to the light and air issue that Rich was talking about. This is a 4-story building. This is a 4-story development. But what they did was they sliced it open and they made this portion the lobby. So instead of the lobby just being a part of the building in a flat facade or called out by an awning, the architects here split the building, used a vernacular form, and used glazing to say, this is a special moment, it's a different programmatic moment. And there's actually, and I think very, very potentially appropriate for our project here, a coffee bar in the lobby that you can, as a member of the public, can come in and grab a cup of coffee. You can sit and meet with friends that live in the building. And it becomes kind of a mixer. Instead of it being public, line, private, you get a kind of mix between the two in spaces like this. And I think that creates a really rich urban tapestry that we want to see on the site. Now, I happen to think, I live in Brooklyn, and there are cars all over Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is the classic pedestrian experience. I happen to think that cars, like seeing cars parked, doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it has to be a thoughtful thing. And we think that active retail requires visible parking and a good relationship with the pedestrians around it. So a couple of examples that came to mind are this project in Washington. Here you can see there's street parking here. There's retail and street parking in a new development, but by really smart use of materials, you can see the road is actually the same material as the sidewalk, use of bollards and use of landscaping. It feels good. It feels like a holistic experience to have cars occupying the same space as pedestrians and dining. This example down on the bottom in Australia is a little more graphic and I think illustrates the point really well. This is the main street. And what looks like an entire sidewalk condition is actually a sidewalk, a parking aisle, landscape, and then the pedestrian experience that's associated with the retail portion. But by using really beautiful paving pattern, an extension of the pedestrian experience, no curbs, using bollards, you get to actually start to create like a seamless pedestrian experience and still integrate cars into the picture. Here in America, here in Oregon, I think another great example of, you've got a single story of retail, dining, paving, a pergola, and then cars incorporated into it too. I think it falls apart when you've just got retail cars. And what we would want to do here is create that rich combination of program. When we think about the architecture, engaging with colonial forms is like a potentially dangerous thing, like we just saw in some of those, some of the conversation that Frank brought up. I would want to go in the direction of a kind of elegant, stripped colonialism. Here, these are just white and black. I'm not proposing that this be black and white only, but you can see this is Hugh Newell Jacobson, a well-known East Coast architect who builds small houses. Well, they're really, really big houses for wealthy people, but strips down colonial forms to its basic elements. And you can see how that starts to grow as you move into a private home, gable, stripped windows, really creating this kind of vertical association. The idea of including dormers, a Bedminster tradition. Here, these are shed dormers versus gable dormers here. And in this example, this is a 4-story building, 3 residential over retail, that does a really good job, I think, like Anna was saying, of breaking up the mass, creating light and air between them, and differentiating horizontally as well. This example makes me think of what the retail could be, that our retail could be really kind of big and welcoming and big in certain instances, 2-story glazing, but within a familiar form. Just some ideas of directions that we could head. This happens to be a project that we're working on right now. These are some early sketches of a project also in New Jersey, multifamily project, where we're using gables, cladding, we're using local fieldstone, and then this is the clubhouse where we take the idea of a gable and we abstract it to create a contemporary experience. And here, the mass steps back and we actually put the mailboxes for the entire project in one place to create a kind of town square where people can come, gather, see their neighbors, actually maybe meet their neighbors in this kind of new suburban, densely suburban environment. Finally, and I'm going to end and I'm going to show you the master plan. We envision a kind of standalone retail building. And I think that the enemy of any good urban, of any dense fabric is homogeneity. So the idea of creating a standalone kind of jewel building that becomes activated by some awesome program like a wine bar or a bike shop to anchor the corner is intriguing to us. These are some examples from Austin, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, that use some really kind of fresh forms to create standalone architecture that really creates a place for their projects. Let me show you a plan of what we're thinking of, and I'm going to end on that. This is the plan that we presented before that I'm not going to spend much time talking about. I'm going to show you how we sort of reconsidered it. What we envisioned was breaking up a 2-lane parking for the retail up on Burnt Mills Road. So let me just orient you. This is Burnt Mills Road. This is Bed 1 back here. And this would be a pedestrian pathway from Bed 1. This is the bank, and here's the intersection. So what we envision really is the public realm here, creating something that's visibly public from the road. So I'd say the big moves here are this public plaza, which pushes the building back. And this is where we envision that kind of urby lobby cafe moment that breaks the building in two. And the other big move is the retail pavilion, a 3,700 square foot retail pavilion that's toward the park side. That's why we were thinking, wouldn't this be an awesome place for a bike rental, for a bike shop or a bike repair shop, with landscaping, an area for tables outside for people to hang out, or maybe it's a wine bar, whatever it is. You would drive in over here. Traffic calming devices like these turns create a calm, pedestrian-friendly setting. Everything is sort of notational at this point as far as the patterning on the parking lot, but we envision a very rich patterning like what I showed you in that project from Australia. The public plaza spills out to two sides. The building steps back and forth to create these sort of variations in scale and in massing. With two main retail components here and here, flanking the lobby. The amenity space here we envision as a gym, which could also be accessed by the public. And then behind here is where most of our surface parking goes, sort of off of Burnt Mills, behind the mass of the building, that would lead to underground parking for the remainder of our building, which would be underneath the amenity deck here. So residents would come in through the lobby, move through the hallways to their apartments, otherwise take elevators up to their apartments on the second or third floor. And as we talk and as we develop, Frank, I love that you put in a picture of townhouses with stoops. Like we'd love to talk about what we do with apartments along the periphery of the building on the first floor. And then this would be for residents, an amenity deck, that they could use for outdoor activities.
And Mark, if you just go back to the previous slide for just a second, because I think we can jump back and highlight. I think that what we had heard from the board, and I think rightly so, and I think the new plan does a much better job than this, is that this plan here felt a little bit, it's less parking, certainly, than the shopping center kitty corner to the property. But it felt like the parking was forward here, and you were basically looking at a pretty homogeneous sea of parking out in front of the building. And there was nothing out to the street. And we recognized that that was important to the township. And secondly, the cool thing that pushing a retail kiosk like a wine bar or bike shop or whatever it might be out to the street did was it eliminated that second curb cut close to the road on the outside of the building. And that's just not a good curb cut. We did not plan that well in this initial concept. It's too close to the other driveway. And bringing the access to the parking in around the back and forcing that traffic calming measure that Mark talked about while providing something exciting out on the street and sort of cornering in this plaza feel to make it feel like a lovely enclosed public space really seemed like a great idea. So a couple key moves there, which we think have enhanced the pedestrian experience and enhanced the real draw to the project. So And then you can see it there. And I think, as Mark said, differential paving throughout. Really think this has the opportunity here with landscaping, paving, the details Frank talked about and that Mark talked about of being a really exciting place for pedestrians from all the different walks, from the park, from the village, from the hills in the evening, from the office at the lunchtime. Really could be an exciting attraction. So anyway, that's what we've been thinking about, and we hope it was responsive to some of what we've heard, and we hope some of it is as exciting to you guys as it is to us. And it seems from Frank's presentation that there might be an opportunity to do a little mind meld on some of what we've shown here and some of what Frank showed. So thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone?
That was great, Mark. Thank you.
Super.
Is there anyone from the board that would like to ask any questions from them, from Mark or from Noah?
Yeah, this is Lou. I have a question. I know this is just a kind of a preview, but have you kind of counted out how much parking you actually need? If you have parking under the buildings, it seems to me like you almost have more parking than you need. Is that possible, or is just my perception of what I'm looking at?
Sorry, Noah, do you want to? I can talk to the retail. So in the retail square footage that we're showing, we're showing 62 spots up front here, which means that we can comfortably park the retail right up front. In the rear, we're at a 1.8, right, for parking?
That's right. It's just under 2, Mark. Yeah. And I think that what we've thought about here, Lou, is that there's going to be a mix of 1 and 2 beds here, not settled on it completely. Most of our more suburban product parks at about 2 to 1 in terms of number of parking spaces per unit. This is a little under that. I think we feel like there would be the opportunity here, maybe probably not for empty nesters who need a little bit more space, but for some of the more younger professionals to have 1 beds or 1 beds with dens here, which means we're trying to get comfortable with less parking on this site. So we've pushed it down below the 2. I think we'd be open to a conversation if we could reduce a little more, but 175 for a multifamily job, and it's probably about as low as anybody in the office would be comfortable with. So that's our thinking around parking there for the residential and the retail.
Okay, thank you.
How many, this is Tim Walter, how many total units is this, am I reading this correctly? 188 is what you're proposing on this design?
It's 180, right?
180.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And we simply kept that consistent with the previous concept.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else on the board?
It's the elevations and sections and such like that.
Ask a question about the renderings, and I really do appreciate the those drawings that you put together, and I think there's some very interesting opportunities. What would be your timing on giving us a little more advanced rendering, some elevation shots? Is that something that are you ready to hear our reaction before proceeding? Or what's your schedule?
This is great. I love when somebody else gets to turn the screws on Mark about how quickly.
I'm not going to answer no.
There's a lot more weight coming from you, Larry, than it does from me.
Tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, let's go back. I mean, just to talk generally about renderings, we generally, when we hit on a concept, we can generally turn renderings around in about 2 weeks' time, and that involves just one back and forth pretty much with our shop, and so it wouldn't be, the full final of what we may ultimately hope. But I mean, Mark, I think based on, if we can get a little direction from the board that you'd like us to render something in the style of, contemporary colonial, here's the type of materials we'd like you guys to be thinking about. We can in the next 3 weeks to a month, Mark, do you think that's realistic?
Yeah, the rendering itself is pretty quick. Really, I think this meeting, having seen Frank's presentation and the reaction to what he showed, and everyone saying yes to page 16 or whichever one we all liked, I liked it too. Mm-hmm. If that's the direction that the board's comfortable in, then I kind of feel comfortable moving into some schematic design of what the building can be, and happy to share that.
Okay.
Mark, if you were here for the first part of the meeting, I don't know that there is even the beginnings of a consensus on the board about what a future development should look like. Frank shared with us a couple of different views of the future, but rather than you completely develop full-scale renderings for this project as you've developed in plan, I'm wondering if you can prepare.
100%.
I'm wondering if you can compare. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can prepare some like thumbnails with a couple of different that go in a couple of different directions, perhaps diverse directions, that we can compare the pros and cons of, or what we like and what we don't like aspects about it before you fully develop something that we just can't stand. I think they'd rather see a little bit more of a design development process where we kind of look at a couple of different approaches and we see how that fits.
Well, I think that's kind of what I suggested, that the board members give Frank some direction before Noah and Mark, go into great detail. I think we need, as you said, Rich, a little more direction, a little more guidance, and what the board members really like.
Well, except I'm going to disagree with that.
Okay.
Because I think, as Frank and Tom pointed out, that we have our vision.
Yes.
But we're not the property owner.
This is
and
true.
To some extent, we are reacting to the property owner's plan. And while we have all ideas, and none of us, other than
we have two
other than half of us having real estate and architectural and planning experience, the fact that I feel that we should be reacting to what Frank is promoting, but at the same time, we should also be reacting and sensitive to what a property owner is going to say, hey, this is realistic, this is not realistic. And I think that we can proceed, and I think it'll be quicker, the whole process, if we go on not necessarily divergent paths, but certainly parallel paths, that we continue to go back and forth with Frank. These are things we like, these are things we don't like. And at the same time, Noah and Mark have heard Frank's presentation, and perhaps more importantly, they've seen our reaction to Frank's presentation, the things we like, the things we don't like, where we want to see a little more responsive from Frank. We've seen their presentation. They've obviously done a little bit of homework on what Bedminster and Pluckman Village looks like. I don't see these as mutually exclusive, to continue to working with Frank while we get some feedback on what their idea is, and that we still can be reacting to what they present. And hopefully at some point, everything converges and there's at least a framework where the board's consensus, if we ever have one, meshes with the property owner's consensus. And going back to the Tom discussion with Nick, is that, depending upon how detailed we want to get, those concepts can then be incorporated into the master plan and possibly into an ordinance. And I just feel that if we continue on one track with Frank and another, and then wait and wait and wait, and then.
I think we're almost saying the same thing, Larry. I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah, but it's not that I don't want to put back, I don't necessarily want to put the brakes on having them do a rendering so that we can see it.
Oh, no, absolutely. They have shown us some things, and I think that the board has seen a lot tonight. I mean, a lot of different concepts from all over the place. And if Noah and Mark want to do that, I think that would be good. Just want the board to be able to feel free to tell Frank, what they felt.
Right.
From where we are at this point.
But we did do that at the, I'm not sure how many meetings ago, we talked about hey, if there's examples of architecture, of design, of
Correct.
buildings that you think are interesting,
Yeah,
whether they're in Bedminster or New Jersey or elsewhere, you just see a photo,
right.
get it over to Frank. And, you know, I know Rich sent some ideas to Frank. I had some conversations with Frank, but I don't know there's much else. So I just think
Right.
that if we
need to progress.
sit and wait,
We need to progress. I understand your point.
nothing's going to happen.
I understand completely. Right.
Can I just interject for a second? Sorry, I'll show the real me. The only thing I think is going to be a sticking point, and I knew it would be from the beginning, and I think that the KRE people have a right to stake their claim on this particular question. A lot of the images I showed you had a building, a big wide sidewalk, some landscaping, and the road. And this arrangement shows those two double loaded rows of parking. And so that's 60 feet plus the sidewalk and the landscaping. So the building's probably 80 feet back from the road. I'm not trying to opine on whether that's good or bad. I think that the point of departure would be, do we see front yard parking as an essential part of the project, both the applicant and the town, or is there any variation on that possible? I think the fact that they're putting under building parking, which obviously costs more than surface parking, is a great feature of the project. If they can reduce the parking a little more because they don't need it, that's also good. But if they need it, how much better that it's under the building. But I think when we start looking at the imagery that we'll probably all agree is great for the village, the question won't be, do we like that appearance? It's going to more be, do we like the way it meets the street? So, and I'm not trying to suggest the answer today. I just point that out as the elephant in the room.
Absolutely, Frank, and we recognize that. And so just to return real quick to Carol and Larry's conversation, we're happy to create some vignettes, and even with as Rich is suggesting, some departures from themselves. And by the way, it may turn out that it's exciting that we're able to come up with a certain contemporary colonial look, and then in that retail kiosk, something that is a departure from that, but that still fits in scale and materials with the village. So we're happy to do that. The parking, you're right, Frank, it's a focus for us. We built, as you know, Rose Hall in Madison, and there we have less than 10,000 square feet, but we have a couple fabulous retail spaces. The building's been open for 2 years now, and we cannot lease them. We just, the lack of parking, we cannot lease them.
Wow.
It unfortunately is, and we banged our head against the walls. I mean, we've gone so far as to offer, really attractive rent terms. This is pre-COVID, of course, that we were having these struggles. They, of course, continue now. But it has just been a huge struggle, and it's really informing our thinking around, suburban, even village, because that's pretty darn close. I mean, that's a half a block from a train station there. Right. And so it's even more sort of integral to the village, but it has really been very difficult for us to lease as a result of the lack of parking there.
You guys,
I got to say, Tim Walter
I'm
here.
gonna speak for you for a second, Mark, and just guess that you love to sketch. So if you could do, on yellow tracing paper, these simple vignettes just to get a little gut reaction from us, you don't have to fully develop a rendering. And I think we can get to the end point just as quickly, but without having us, have to react to, the more you get attached to the scheme, and this is why I call it howitzer practice, and you're trying to guess what our sensibilities are, we can get some quick reaction to some vignettes, and then you can proceed with a little bit more confidence as opposed to taking a shot in the dark.
Like to see the creativity, really.
Yeah, I agree with Rich on that.
I got to say, I like the site plan. I want to thank Noah and Mark. I don't think the parking in the front is overwhelming. I didn't originally imagine that, but I think there's a good balance there. So I got to tell you, I kind of like that site plan. But yeah, would love to see some facade examples. What do you guys come up with? That'd be great.
I have a question for Mark. This is Lou. And that design you showed us, there was a lot of interior, I call it, I guess, a courtyard space for the apartments. Is that going to be private courtyard space for the apartments? What do you have in mind for that? Because it was just open space there in your drawings.
Yeah, we haven't really articulated it yet. The idea is that a portion of it would be private for the residents, probably have a pool deck there, and some outdoor amenities like for, if we're expecting kids, we'll do a tot lots and barbecues, just make it kind of like a social place. And next time we present, I can bring some pictures of a similar scaled courtyard. It's actually like, it's quite a big courtyard that we just finished in Bayonne that feels really great and that the residents love. But there would be a public component for the office tenants and users walking through. So it would kind of, there'd be a separation between the two.
Okay, so my comment to that is, Bedminster, we don't have a lot of small kind of public gathering places, the kind of places where people might get together, during Halloween events, or, we have big parks, but we don't have these kind of, places where people can gather in groups of maybe 100 people and do different types of events.
Yeah.
And I would just say, if there's some way you can incorporate that kind of gathering meeting space in that plan somewhere, I think it'd be a great addition for Bedminster.
I think that's an awesome suggestion. That's great.
Yep. And Lou, I mean, that obviously, most of our suburban jobs, we rarely run into an interaction between public and private space. They're just simply private. All of our urban jobs, we try very, very hard to create the maximum amount of public space while realizing it's still private property and there's going to be some private space. So it's a great comment. We'll take a further look at it. But I don't want to suggest that, we'd open up the amenity deck to the public. Like,
No,
overall.
I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
Comments for Mark or for Noah?
So just on timing, what's everyone's expectation from KRE? And
Did Mark say 3 weeks?
what's your expectation from us?
Well, we could try to make the first meeting in November. We could try to do something at the beginning of the meeting.
We'll have it by then. Easy.
Right.
Yes?
Yeah.
Did
Yes.
I hear yes? No? Okay. Is that all right with the board?
Sure.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Where's Tom? Do we lose Tom?
He's here.
He's right there. He's in San Francisco.
In the fog.
Lost in the fog.
I hadn't heard Tom's voice in a while, so I just want to make sure he's still there.
He's at the Golden Gate.
Means we're not doing anything wrong.
That's right.
Can't see through all that fog over the bridge.
Hi, I'm still here. I was very fascinated by the discussion, and I think it's great. I just want to try to keep things a little bit separated, though. I'd like any next meeting we talk about it to not be a meeting with site plan cases. As I always say to you, it's better to master plan things separately from site plan things. On the first meeting in November, do we have anything scheduled, Paul, for site plans?
I know that Bedminster Farms really wants to be heard. I believe Lamington Farms will want to be back by then. We may have continuation of 1525 Bedminster. We may have Pluckerman getting ready to go. And that's before two other applications that are potentially coming down the road. So we've got a lot.
Because we have so much activity right now, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I know that.
What I'll point out is, certainly Tom and I and Carol are sensitive to this, is that that Bedminster Township has a settlement agreement approved by the court that we are to have the affordable housing zoned or constructed by the end of June 2021.
Right.
So every once in a while, you hear me as the mayor talking about scheduling and timeframes, we are still in the beginning stages of master plan look-see, and which hopefully would then be followed by an ordinance changing the zoning to accommodate this, to accommodate that affordable housing obligation. So that's why I'm just I'm looking at the schedule.
I
I'm
understand.
seeing what we have for October, November,
Right.
and hearing from Janine and Paul. We've got a, we're sort of chock full of site plan applications.
Yeah, we
So
do.
We may need to do a special.
Well, that's certainly okay. We can certainly do that. We could have it just for this master
Right.
plan. Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Okay. Maybe the end of October? Have it on a Thursday night in October?
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, it's
Is it-
so
is
so here. So think about what we just did today. We really went through Frank's
Right.
presentation,
Right.
a little bit of the KRE's,
Right.
visioning, and these are still preliminary visions, and it's 2 hours,
Yeah, I know.
and there's still a heck of a lot more comments.
A lot more.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's plan for a meeting in October then, a special meeting.
What I might suggest that if you're going to do that, potentially make it October 29th. It's the 5th Thursday, and I can tell you that I don't have another meeting that night. I can't tell you that about any of the other Thursdays. And
I'm going to give credit to October 29th to Janine Tillion, who before Paul did.
Okay, so we'll do the 29th then.
Sounds good. I'm available, Madam Chairman.
Oh, good. Okay.
Frank, are you available?
I am, yep. I'm just putting it in the calendar now. Paul picked the right night.
Okay.
Great.
That was easy. Where's that easy one? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, just to be safe,
Yes.
why don't we open to the public in case there happens to be someone interested who hasn't been able to say
Okay.
what they would like to say? I don't know. I didn't look. So
Is there anybody there, Janine, that you see? No, no one's there. Okay. Well, we will thank Mark and Noah for their participation.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Let's look forward to the 29th.
We will see you on the 29th then.
Okay.
And I think we have a motion for adjournment.
Motion.
Second.
Okay. We will see you next week.
All right. Good night, everyone.
good night,
Good
everybody.
night, everybody.
good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Next week.
Night, Gracie.
Good night, Gracie.